The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Birmingham as the city prepared for something it had never quite experienced before. July 30th, 2025 would forever be etched in the memory of every soul who called this industrial heartland home. The Prince of Darkness was coming home one final time, his journey complete, his legacy immortal, leaving behind a world fundamentally changed by his presence. 8 days earlier, on July 22nd, the world had shuddered to a halt when news broke that John Michael Ozzy Osbourne had passed away at his beloved home in Buckinghamshire, succumbing to a heart attack at the age of 76. The man who had spent decades defying death, dancing with demons, and surviving every excess imaginable had finally met his match in the most ordinary of ways. His heart simply stopped beating. But for those who knew the real Ozzy, there was nothing ordinary about the love that surrounded him in those final moments, surrounded by his family, held in the embrace of those who had watched him transform from a working-class kid from Aston into a global icon whose influence would outlive empires. The silence that followed the announcement was deafening. From Los Angeles to London, from Tokyo to São Paulo, from small-town America to the remotest corners of Europe, fans gathered in spontaneous vigils, lighting candles and playing Paranoid on repeat. Social media exploded with tributes from fellow musicians, celebrities, and ordinary people whose lives had been touched by his music. Elton John's words echoed around the world. He was a dear friend and a huge trailblazer who secured his place in the pantheon of rock gods, a true legend. Metallica's James Hetfield shared a photo of him and Ozzy with the simple caption, "The Godfather has gone home. Metal will never be the same." If this story moves you, please consider leaving a like to help spread Ozzy's incredible legacy to more people who need to hear it. But it was Kelly Osbourne's tearful interview 3 days after her father's passing that truly broke the world's heart and provided the most intimate glimpse into the man behind the myth. Sitting in the family's Los Angeles home, surrounded by decades of memories, gold records, and family photographs that told the story of a life lived to its absolute fullest, Kelly struggled to find words adequate enough to capture the magnitude of their loss. Her voice, usually so strong and defiant like her father's, cracked as she spoke to the gathered press, each word weighted with grief and love. "People keep asking me what his last words were," Kelly began, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue that had already been soaked with tears. "They want some grand statement, something profound that they can quote forever, something that fits the legend. But Dad wasn't like that in the end. He was just Dad, the most loving, gentle, stubborn, beautiful man who ever lived." She paused, collecting herself before continuing, her eyes distant as she traveled back to that final morning. "We were all there, Mum, Jack, Amy, Lewis, and me. Dad had been struggling more with the Parkinson's, and we knew his heart wasn't good. The doctors had been honest with us about his coronary artery disease. They told us to prepare ourselves. But how do you prepare for losing someone who seems immortal?" But he was still fighting, still making jokes, still being the most stubborn man alive. Even when his body was failing, his spirit was unbreakable. Kelly's eyes filled with tears as she remembered that final morning, the details she shared painting a picture of a man who had found peace with his mortality, who had lived fully and loved deeply. He woke up around 6 a.m., which was unusual for him. Mum was right there beside him, holding his hand like she had for over 40 years, through everything, the good times, the addiction, the recovery, the health scares, the triumphs. She never left his side, not once. He looked at all of us, and his eyes were so clear, clearer than they'd been in months. It was like the fog had lifted, and he could see everything perfectly for one last time. The room fell silent as Kelly wiped her eyes, gathering strength for what came next. He squeezed Mum's hand and said, "Sharon, my love, it's been one hell of a ride. Thank you for saving me, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. I love you more than words can say." Then he looked at each of us kids, and he said something I'll never forget, something that will stay with me until my dying day. He said, "I'm not scared. I can feel it's time. Take care of each other, and remember, the music never dies. Neither does love. You all made my life worth living." Those were his last coherent words before things got serious. What Kelly didn't mention in that interview But what would later emerge from witness accounts and emergency service reports was the desperate 2-hour battle that followed those precious final words. At 10:30 a.m., a Thames Valley Air ambulance had landed in the field near Welder's house, the Osbourne family's Grade 2 listed mansion in Buckinghamshire. Paramedics had fought valiantly to save the rock legend's life, working tirelessly for 2 hours as the family watched and prayed, their hearts breaking with each passing minute. The emergency responders later described it as one of the most difficult cases they'd ever handled, not just medically, but emotionally, knowing they were fighting for the life of a man who had meant so much to so many people. But sometimes, even the strongest hearts must surrender to time, and Ozzy's heart, which had carried him through decades of abuse and adventure, had simply given all it could give. The paramedics spoke of a family united in love, holding each other as they said their final goodbyes to the man who had been the center of their universe. The tragedy was made even more poignant by what had happened just 17 days before. On July 5th, Ozzy had performed his final show with Black Sabbath in Birmingham, the very city where it all began over 50 years ago. Seated on his ornate black throne, unable to stand due to the Parkinson's that had ravaged his body but left his voice and spirit intact, he had delivered a performance that reminded everyone why he was called the Prince of Darkness. The crowd of 42,000 people had sung every word back to him, their voices creating a symphony of love and gratitude that had moved even the most jaded music journalists to tears. The concert, billed as Back to the Beginning, had been organized as a charity event, with all proceeds going to Parkinson's research, Birmingham Children's Hospital, and local hospices. It was vintage Ozzy. Even in his final public appearance, he was thinking of others, using his platform to help those in need. The setlist had been carefully chosen. War Pigs, NIB, Iron Man, and Paranoid, the songs that had defined heavy metal and launched 1,000 bands. After that show, Kelly continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke about her father's final triumph. Dad kept saying he felt complete. He said he'd given everything he had to give, and that Birmingham concert was his gift back to the city that made him, to the fans who had loved him through everything. He knew it was his goodbye, and he wanted it to be perfect, and it was. It was absolutely perfect. The impact of Ozzy's death reverberated far beyond the music world, reaching into every corner of popular culture and touching lives in ways that surprised even his most devoted fans. He had been more than just a heavy metal icon. He had been a cultural phenomenon who had introduced multiple generations to the power of rock and roll, shown them that it was okay to be different, and proven that redemption was always possible. His influence extended from the darkest metal bands to pop stars like Post Malone, who had collaborated with him on Take What You Want in 2019, giving Ozzy his first top 10 hit in 30 years and introducing him to an entirely new generation of fans. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a music historian at Oxford University, who had written extensively about the cultural impact of heavy metal, explained the significance of Ozzy's passing. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just perform music, he embodied rebellion, survival, and the triumph of the human spirit over seemingly impossible odds. His journey from a working-class Birmingham youth with dyslexia and attention deficit disorder to global superstar, his very public battles with addiction, his health struggles, and his ultimate redemption through family love, it's the stuff of legend, but it's also deeply human. He showed the world that it was possible to rise from the ashes of your own destruction, to find love and meaning even in the darkest places. The story of Ozzy's final years had been one of gradual decline punctuated by moments of transcendent beauty and stubborn defiance against the inevitable. After revealing his Parkinson's diagnosis in 2020, he had struggled with mobility issues that eventually left him wheelchair-bound and dependent on others for basic care. Yet his spirit remained unbroken, his sense of humor intact, his love for his family and music undiminished. The disease had been cruel, robbing him of his mobility and independence, while leaving his mind largely untouched, forcing him to watch helplessly as his body betrayed him. But even in those final years, he had continued to work on music, to spend time with his family, to plan for the future. Sharon Osbourne had stood by him through it all, their love story becoming a testament to the power of commitment and devotion that transcended fame and fortune. He used to joke that he'd outlive us all, Sharon said in her own interview shortly after his passing, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. He'd survived everything: the drugs, the alcohol, the accidents, the surgeries, the overdoses that should have killed him multiple times. He thought he was invincible, and honestly, so did we. But in the end, it wasn't any of those things that took him. It wasn't the lifestyle or the excess or any of the dangerous things he'd done. It was just time. His body had given everything it had to give, and it was ready to rest. The outpouring of grief and love that followed the announcement of Ozzy's death was unprecedented in its scope and intensity. Fans gathered outside the family's homes in Los Angeles and Buckinghamshire, leaving flowers, letters, and personal mementos. Radio stations worldwide abandoned their regular programming to play Black Sabbath and Ozzy solo tracks. Concert venues that had hosted him over the years held impromptu memorial services. Even unlikely venues, shopping malls, restaurants, bars, played his music as a way of honoring his memory. The funeral procession through Birmingham on July 30th was unlike anything the city had ever witnessed. A true celebration of a life well lived and a legacy that would endure forever. Thousands lined the streets as the hearse made its way from the city centre to the private service, the route carefully planned to take them past all the significant locations from Ozzy's early life. The procession passed his childhood home on Lodge Road, where he had grown up in poverty, dreaming of something bigger than the factory jobs that seemed to be his destiny. It went by the music shop where he had placed the famous Ozzy Zig Needs Gig advertisement that had changed his life forever. Fans from around the world had travelled to pay their respects, many wearing Black Sabbath t-shirts spanning 5 decades of designs, some with tears streaming down their faces, others celebrating with raised fists and devil horns. The gesture Ozzy had made famous, and that had become the universal symbol of rock rebellion. Street musicians played acoustic versions of Crazy Train and Paranoid, their voices joining in a spontaneous chorus that followed the procession through the city, like a musical river of love and remembrance. At the Black Sabbath Bridge on Broad Street, someone had left a handwritten note that captured the sentiment of millions. Thank you for showing us that it's okay to be different, that darkness can be beautiful, and that love conquers all. Rest in peace, Prince of Darkness. Your music will echo in our hearts forever. The bridge itself had become an impromptu shrine, covered in flowers, photographs, guitar picks, and vinyl records, a visual testament to the impact one man's music could have on the world. The scene outside St. Michael's Church was both heartbreaking and beautiful, a collision of grief and celebration that perfectly captured the duality that had defined Ozzy's life. Flowers covered every available surface, black roses mixed with traditional white lilies, creating a visual representation of the light and darkness that had coexisted within him. Fans had left personal mementos that told thousands of individual stories, guitar picks from concerts, vinyl records worn smooth from decades of play, letters of gratitude from people whose lives had been saved by his music, and photographs of themselves at Ozzy concerts spanning 5 decades. One particularly touching memorial came from a group of teenagers who had travelled from Germany with a banner that read, "Thank you for teaching our parents to rock, and thank you for teaching us." It was a perfect encapsulation of Ozzy's multi-generational appeal, his ability to speak to the rebel in every heart, regardless of age. Sharon Osbourne, showing the strength that had sustained her through 43 years of marriage to rock's wildest man, spoke briefly to the crowd gathered outside the church. Dressed in black but radiating dignity and grace, she addressed the thousands who had come to say goodbye, her words carrying clearly in the hushed crowd that hung on every syllable. Ozzy would be both amazed and probably a little embarrassed by all this, she said with a tearful smile that somehow managed to be both heartbroken and radiant. He always said he was just a working-class bloke from Birmingham who got lucky, who stumbled into something bigger than himself. But we all know he was so much more than that. He was magic. He was love. He was hope for everyone who ever felt like they didn't fit in, like they were too weird, too different, too much. He showed us all that those things that make us different are actually our superpowers. The private service was attended by music royalty from across the globe, a gathering that read like a who's who of rock and metal history. Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward, his Black Sabbath brothers, served as pallbearers. their faces etched with grief for the friend who had shared their incredible journey from Birmingham nobodies to rock gods. The sight of these legendary musicians, now elderly men carrying their bandmate's coffin, was a powerful reminder of the passage of time and the unbreakable bonds forged through shared creativity and decades of friendship. Elton John delivered a eulogy that had everyone in attendance weeping openly, speaking about Ozzy's vulnerability beneath the wild exterior, with the insight that only comes from decades of friendship. Behind all the madness, all the controversy, all the headlines was a man with the biggest heart I've ever known, Sir Elton said, his voice breaking with emotion. He loved his family, he loved his fans, and he loved music with a purity that never dimmed, even as his body began to fail him. He was one of the kindest, most generous people I've ever met, and I'm honoured to have called him my friend. Members of Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, and dozens of other bands that Ozzy had influenced sat in silent tribute, many of them crying openly as they remembered the man who had inspired them to pick up instruments and change their lives. Lars Ulrich was seen wiping tears as video messages played from artists who couldn't attend but wanted to share their memories. Even Paul McCartney, Ozzy's musical hero and the man who had inspired him to become a musician in the first place, sent a heartfelt tribute that spoke to the universal respect the Birmingham rocker had earned. But perhaps the most touching moment came when the service played a recording of Ozzy's voice from his final Birmingham concert, his words carrying extra weight in the context of what everyone now knew would be his final public statement. "I don't know what to say, man. I've been laid up for like 6 years. You have no idea how I feel. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You're all special. Let's go crazy, come on." Basho. The words hung in the air like a final blessing, a call to celebration from a man who had spent his life encouraging others to embrace their authentic selves, no matter how strange or different they might be. In that moment, every person in the church could feel his presence, his joy, his unquenchable spirit that no disease or death could diminish. Jack Osbourne later revealed that his father had been working on one final project before his death, a compilation of unreleased recordings and a documentary about his life that would reveal sides of him the public had never seen. "Dad wanted to make sure his story was told properly," Jack explained, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just the wild times and the controversies that everyone knows about, but the love, the music, the family, the redemption, the quiet moments when he was just a dad worried about his kids. He wanted people to understand that behind all the madness was a man who loved deeply and was deeply loved in return." The recordings, set to be released later in 2025 under the title Forever, the Final Chapter, include Ozzy's final song, recorded just 3 weeks before his death. Those who have heard it describe it as his most personal work ever, a love letter to his family, his fans, and the music that defined his life. The song, titled "The Music Never Dies," features Ozzy's voice at its most vulnerable, backed by a simple piano arrangement that strips away all pretense and reveals the beating heart beneath the Prince of Darkness persona. As news of Ozzy's passing spread globally, the response was both overwhelming and deeply moving. Vigils were held in every major city, with fans gathering to share stories, play music, and celebrate the life of the man who had given them so much. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland opened its doors for a special memorial, displaying Ozzy's costumes, awards, and memorabilia. The response was overwhelming. People queued for hours just to pay their respects, sharing stories of how his music had saved their lives, given them courage, or simply provided the soundtrack to their youth. In Birmingham, the City Council announced plans for a permanent memorial to honour their most famous son, a project that would transform the area around the Black Sabbath Bridge into a lasting tribute to the 4 men who had changed music forever. The memorial will feature bronze sculptures of all 4 original Black Sabbath members, with Ozzy at the center, microphone in hand, mouth open in eternal song. The design will also include interactive elements, allowing visitors to listen to the band's music and learn about their journey from working-class Birmingham boys to global superstars. The global outpouring of grief was matched by an equally powerful celebration of life and music that lasted for weeks. Radio stations worldwide played Black Sabbath and Ozzy solo tracks for 24 hours straight. Concert venues that had hosted him over the years held tribute events, with local bands covering his songs and sharing memories. Metallica dedicated their entire European tour to his memory, opening each show with War Pigs. Even unlikely artists paid homage. Adele sang Changes at her Las Vegas residency, her powerful voice bringing new depth to the emotional ballad, while Coldplay performed an acoustic version of Iron Man at their Nashville show on the night of his death. The impact extended beyond music into other forms of art and culture. Artists created murals in cities around the world, depicting Ozzy in his various incarnations, the wild young frontman of Black Sabbath, the solo artist at his peak, the loving family man from the Osbournes, and the dignified elder statesman of rock. Writers began working on books about his influence, while filmmakers announced plans for documentaries that would explore his lasting impact on music and culture. Kelly Osbourne's interview concluded with words that perhaps captured the essence of who Ozzy Osbourne really was, stripping away the mythology to reveal the man beneath. People see the wild man, the bat-biting, the controversy, the Prince of Darkness persona, but I see the dad who made us breakfast on Sunday mornings, singing Black Sabbath songs while flipping pancakes. I see the man who cried during Disney movies, who called us every single day when we were away from home just to make sure we were okay. He was our protector, our cheerleader, our hero, our anchor. The world lost the Prince of Darkness, but we lost our dad, our heart, our home. She paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held the same intensity as her father's, the same fire that had burned in him throughout his remarkable life, the same passion that had driven him to create music that would outlast empires. But you know what? He's not really gone. He can't be gone. Every time someone cranks up Crazy Train, every time a kid picks up a guitar for the first time, every time someone finds the courage to be themselves in a world that wants them to conform, that's Dad, still out there, still inspiring, still proving that music never dies, that love never dies, that the human spirit is indestructible. The weeks following the funeral saw an unprecedented surge in Black Sabbath and Ozzy solo album sales, with streaming numbers breaking records as new generations discovered his music. Young fans who had only known him as the lovable patriarch from the Osbournes delved into his musical catalogue and discovered the revolutionary artist who had helped create heavy metal, who had shown them that music could be both beautiful and terrifying, gentle and aggressive, spiritual and rebellious. Music schools reported increased enrollment in vocal and performance classes, with many students citing Ozzy as their inspiration. The Ozzy effect, as musicologists began calling it, demonstrated the lasting power of authentic artistic expression. Here was a man who had never pretended to be anything other than exactly who he was, and that honesty had resonated across cultures, generations, and musical genres, proving that authenticity never goes out of style. As the sun set on Birmingham on the day of his funeral, thousands of fans gathered in the city centre for an impromptu sing-along that would be remembered for generations. Their voices rose together in the twilight, singing the songs that had soundtracked their lives, honouring the man who had given them permission to be loud, to be different, to be themselves in a world that often demanded conformity. The gathering was organic, unplanned, but somehow perfectly orchestrated by the collective love of the crowd. Someone started singing Paranoid, and within moments, thousands of voices had joined in, their combined power creating something that transcended music and became pure emotion. The sound echoed off the buildings, a primal cry of loss and celebration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the city, a final farewell that Ozzy himself would have loved. Local news crews captured the moment, but no camera could truly convey the emotion in the air, the sense of community and shared loss that bound strangers together in song. People hugged each other, shared stories with fellow fans they'd never met, and wiped away tears while singing at the top of their lungs. It was exactly the kind of celebration Ozzy would have wanted, raw, real, and full of the kind of human connection that music makes possible. The Prince of Darkness had returned home one final time, but his music, his spirit, and his message would live on forever, inspiring countless future generations to find their own voices and tell their own stories. In recording studios around the world, young musicians were already picking up guitars and following in his footsteps. proving that his influence would ripple through time like an eternal echo. In the words carved into the flowers at his grave, placed there by Sharon with shaking hands and a breaking heart, the music never dies, and neither does love. It was a promise, a testament, and a celebration, all wrapped into one simple truth: that some people burn so brightly during their time on Earth that their light continues to shine long after they're gone, illuminating the path for others to follow. If this tribute to Ozzy's incredible life and legacy touched your heart, please show your appreciation with a like. Let's ensure his story continues to inspire future generations of dreamers and rebels who dare to be different.